The laugh that broke her was not the loudest one. It was a small, delighted one from the woman she had once called a friend. The little intake of breath, the "oh my God, Nora, no," the phone lifted at hip height so no one would see it recording. That was the laugh Nora Bennett carried out of the Ashford Winter Ballroom in the ruined green dress. That was the laugh she was still hearing 2 hours later when the man in the black overcoat set a glass of water in front of her at a bar she did not remember walking into and said, without introducing himself, "Tell me their names." She told him 3. By Friday, there would be 7. By the end of the month, there would not be an Ashford left in Chicago with a name worth printing. Hard cut. The night had started, as most of Nora Bennett's worst nights started, with a favor she should not have said yes to. Grace Molina had called her at 4 in the afternoon, panicked, half crying. The girl who was supposed to float the coat room at the Ashford Winter Ballroom had walked off the job at 3. The agency had nobody. And Grace, who ran the event staffing desk at the Drake, had promised the Ashfords a warm body in a black dress by 7. Grace had begged. Grace had said, "Please, Nor, it's $400 for 6 hours, and I know you need it." Grace had said, "Nobody will even look at you. You'll be behind a counter the whole night." Nora had said yes, because her mother's oxygen concentrator had begun to make a sound. The rental company called "nothing to worry about," and the internet called "replace immediately." And because the replacement cost $1,200 she did not have, and because $400 was $400 closer. She had also said yes because Grace was the only person in the city of Chicago who had ever, in 28 years, looked at Nora Bennett and seen a whole person. The dress was the problem. The dress had always been going to be the problem. Grace had promised her the agency uniform in a size 22, and the agency uniform in a size 22 had turned out to be, in fact, a size 18 with an optimistic label. Nora had stood in the staff bathroom of the Drake for 11 minutes, trying to make the zipper meet in the back, and had, at last, pulled a moss-green cocktail dress out of her own tote, the one she had bought 3 years ago for her father's memorial, and never worn again, because her father had died before she could bring herself to put it on for him. It fit. It fit beautifully, in fact, the way clothes fit when someone at a counter had once looked at your actual body and made something for it. The neckline was modest. The waist did not lie. The skirt fell to just below her knee in a soft, forgiving line. Grace, when she saw it, had put a hand to her mouth. "Nora, you look. Don't. I was going to say, expensive. Don't say anything. Let's just get through the night." The Ashford Winter Ballroom was the sort of event that existed to remind the people who were invited that they had been invited, and to remind the people who had not been invited that they had not been. Camilla Ashford, 29, blonde, glacially thin, engaged for the 3rd time in 4 years, had inherited the event from her mother the way other people inherit brochures. It was held in the Palm Court of the Drake every 2nd Saturday of December. It raised money, on paper, for a children's literacy foundation whose board Camilla chaired. It raised, in practice, Camilla's profile. Nora took her station behind the coat check counter at 7 exactly and did what she had been hired to do. She smiled. She handed over numbered brass tags. She did not make eye contact with any guest for longer than the transaction required. She stood behind the counter, which hid her from the sternum down, and she kept her hands moving, and by 9 o'clock, she had begun to believe she might actually make it through the night unnoticed. At 9:14, Camilla Ashford came looking for her. Nora heard her before she saw her. The click of a heel that expensive had a particular sound on a marble floor, and Camilla was traveling with an entourage, 2 bridesmaids from the last engagement, a junior society columnist from the Tribune, and a man Nora did not recognize but disliked instantly, a soft-jawed banker in a dinner jacket cut too tight at the shoulders. Camilla arrived at the counter in a cloud of tuberose and Krug and leaned both elbows on the marble, as though the counter were a bar and Nora were a bartender. She was about to tip badly. "Nora Bennett," Camilla said, delighted, as though Nora were a very old friend she had not expected to run into. "Girls, this is Nora. We went to Latin together." The bridesmaids made polite murmuring sounds. The columnist smiled the smile of a woman who was already writing her sentence. The banker looked Nora up and down once without interest, and then again with something worse than interest. Nora had not gone to Latin with Camilla Ashford. Nora had gone to Latin around Camilla Ashford. Nora had been at Latin on a full scholarship because Thomas Bennett had been, at the time, the third-generation owner of Bennett Meridian Freight, and Thomas Bennett had believed in giving his only daughter the best of everything. Camilla Ashford had been the reason Nora had eaten lunch in the library for 4 years. Camilla Ashford had been the reason Nora had learned, at 15, how to fold herself very small in a hallway. Camilla Ashford had been in the language of the schoolyard creative, which had meant that Camilla Ashford had never once called Nora a name to her face, and had also never once in 4 years allowed a day to pass in which Nora did not know that Camilla Ashford was thinking one. "Camilla," Nora said evenly, "would you like your coat?" "Oh, sweetheart, I'm not leaving. I came to say hello." Camilla tilted her head, considering. "I almost didn't recognize you. Well, you look wonderful." "Thank you. The dress is darling. Where is it from?" "I don't remember, really, because it looks so familiar." "Doesn't it look familiar, Wit?" Camilla turned to one of the bridesmaids, who nodded vigorously without any idea what she was agreeing to. "I feel like I've seen it. Isn't that funny?" Camilla tapped a fingernail on the counter. "Nora, come around. Come out from behind there. Let me see the whole thing." "I'm working, Camilla. Grace said you could take a 15. I already asked." There was no version of this that ended well. Nora knew it in her stomach, the way an animal knows weather, but Grace was somewhere on the floor with a headset and the clipboard, and Grace had told her yes, and the $400 had already been earmarked in Nora's head for the concentrator. And refusing Camilla Ashford in her own ballroom in front of a Tribune columnist was a thing that had consequences Nora could not that night afford. She came around the counter. Camilla made a small, satisfied sound. She circled Nora once, slowly, the way one circles a horse before buying it. She reached out and touched, very lightly, the fabric at Nora's waist. "It's gorgeous," she said. "Really. I mean it. It's amazing what they can do now. Girls, isn't it amazing what they can do now? For for real women." She smiled at Nora, warm as a lamp. "I always say, confidence is the best accessory. You don't even care, do you? You just wear it." "Camilla, no, I mean it. It's brave. I could never. I would be so self-conscious." She turned to the columnist. "Isn't she brave? Write that down. Nora Bennett. Brave." The columnist laughed. The banker laughed. The bridesmaids laughed. Camilla laughed, delighted with herself, and then she reached, casually the way one reaches for a canapé, and took the glass of red wine out of the banker's hand and, in a gesture that read to every witness later interviewed as an accident, honestly, she stumbled "The floor is so slick," poured it slowly and completely down the front of Nora Bennett's moss-green dress. The gasp of the room was not a real gasp. It was the theatrical gasp of 40 people who had all, on some level, been waiting for something to happen, and were now grateful to it for happening. Camilla's hand flew to her mouth. Camilla said, "Oh my God, Nora, I'm so sorry, oh my God." Camilla said it loud enough that the string quartet in the corner heard her over their own bows. Someone, Nora would not for the rest of her life know who, began to clap, slow and sarcastic, and then a second person joined, and then the laughter started, and it was not the laughter of 40 people. It was the laughter of 40 people who had all decided, at once, to be one person, and that person was cruel. The small, delighted intake of breath came from Nora's left. Nora turned her head. Grace Molina was standing at the edge of the crowd with her clipboard against her chest and her mouth in a shape Nora did not recognize. Not shock, not horror. Something smaller and more familiar. Something like, "Oh no, and thank God it isn't me," in the same breath. Grace's phone was in her other hand. The screen was lit. The little red dot at the top corner was on. That was the laugh. That was the one Nora carried out with her. She did not cry. She had learned, at 15, in the hallways at Latin, that Camilla Ashford's greatest and most reliable pleasure was tears, and Nora Bennett had spent 13 years perfecting the discipline of not giving her any. She looked down at the ruined dress. She looked up at Camilla. She said, quite clearly, so the columnist would get it right, "I hope it was worth it, Camilla." She walked out of the Palm Court in the ruined green dress. She did not stop at the coat check to collect her coat, because her coat was a puffer from the outlet mall in Aurora, and putting it on over the wine stain would have made her look. She understood with a clarity she would remember all her life like a woman who had been ruined. She walked out into the cold in the dress. She walked past the doorman who did not, to his credit, look at her. She walked out onto Walton Street in December in Chicago without a coat. And she kept walking east, because east was the lake. And the lake was the only direction in that city she had ever as a child thought of as clean. The wind off Lake Michigan in December was the kind of wind that had opinions about you. It went through the wet silk of the dress and found her ribs and made a decision about them. Nora walked. She walked past the Drake's East entrance. She walked past the little Catholic church on the corner. She walked 1 block, 2, 3. And at some point she understood that she was not walking toward anything, she was walking away from something. And the something was the sound of 40 people deciding together that she was a joke. At the corner of Michigan and Oak, she stopped because her legs had stopped, and she stood under the awning of a closed jeweler, and she pressed the heels of both hands against her eyes, and she made at last one small sound, not a sob, just a breath let out in the wrong shape, and that was when the black car pulled up to the curb. It did not honk. It did not roll down its window. It simply stopped, which in Chicago, on Michigan Avenue on a Saturday night in December, was a thing cars did not do unless they meant to. The passenger door opened. A man got out. He was tall, dark-haired, in a black overcoat over a black suit, and he moved the way people move when they have never in their adult lives had to hurry. He did not come toward her. He walked around the back of the car and opened the rear door and stood there, holding it, and looked at her across the roof. "Miss," he said. His voice was low and unhurried and had, underneath it, the faintest suggestion of an accent Nora could not, in that moment, place. "You are going to freeze to death out here." "I'm fine." "You are not fine. I don't know you." "No," he agreed. "You don't." He did not close the door. "There is a bar 2 blocks from here. It is warm. It is quiet. I will buy you a drink and the coat, and I will not sit at your table unless you invite me to. If you would prefer, I will call you a car and pay for it, and you will never see me again. But you cannot stand under this awning in a wet dress in December, because you will get pneumonia, and I will feel, unreasonably, that it was my fault." Nora looked at him. She had learned at 15 in the hallways at Latin to read a face very quickly and very accurately, because the difference between a face that meant her harm and a face that was merely indifferent to her had been, at 15, the difference between a good day and the bad one. The face across the roof of the black car was not indifferent. It was also not, and this was what she noticed and what she would remember, looking at her body. It was looking at her face, at her eyes. It was waiting for her to answer. She said, "The bar." "The bar," he said, and did not smile, and did not look pleased with himself, and simply nodded once and stood aside so she could get in. The car smelled of leather and something faintly like clove. There was a driver behind the wheel who did not turn around. There was, in the seat pocket in front of her, a folded cashmere throw in charcoal grey, which the man reached across her without touching her, and unfolded and laid across her lap. "My name is Damiano Vitale," he said. "I run a family in this city. You have likely heard the name, and I would prefer, for the next hour, that you pretend you have not. Okay. You do not have to tell me yours. Nora. Nora." He did not ask for more. The car pulled away from the curb and slid south on Michigan and turned at some corner Nora did not track, and 8 minutes later, they were in front of a place she had walked past 100 times and never gone into. A narrow doorway between a bank and a shuttered bookstore, no sign. One small brass plate that read Tester and nothing else. The driver got out and opened her door. Damiano Vitale walked her in with one hand hovering an inch behind her back, not touching her, guiding her the way you guide a person you are not sure will bolt. The bar was warm. The bar was in fact the warmest room Nora had ever been in. Some combination of a fireplace along the back wall, and low amber lamps and the deep quiet, expensive hum of a place that did not want anyone in it who did not already belong. There were perhaps 12 people in the room, and none of them looked up when Damiano Vitale walked in, which Nora understood, in the pit of her, was because all 12 of them had been trained not to. A woman in a black waistcoat appeared beside them with a folded wool coat over her arm. Long, dark, cut for a woman, and Nora saw with a small internal jolt her size. The woman helped Nora into it without commentary. The woman took the ruined green dress's wet hem and, with a practiced gesture, tucked it inside the coat so no one would see the stain. "Thank you," Nora said quietly to the woman. "Of course, Miss Bennett," the woman said. Nora's head turned. She had not at any point given anyone in this building her last name. Damiano Vitale did not react. He walked her to a booth at the back of the room, a curved leather booth deep half-hidden behind a screen of dark wood, and stood beside it until she had slid in, and then he sat, not next to her but across from her, which Nora registered as a courtesy. She had not been extended by a man in some time. He set a glass of water in front of her. He said, without preamble, without introduction, without any of the softenings a person usually uses, "Tell me their names." She looked at him. "Miss Bennett, tell me the names of the people who did that to you tonight." "Why?" He considered the question. He seemed to take it seriously, which was not something Nora was used to from men in expensive coats. "Because I have been looking for a reason to end the Ashford family for 11 months, he said, "and I would like it, if you don't mind, to be a reason that matters." Nora set down the glass of water. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. "I know you don't. I am going to tell you, and when I am done, you will decide whether we are having a different conversation, or whether I put you in a car and take you home and you never see me again. Both are acceptable to me. Only one of them is acceptable to them. The Meeble, the people who laughed tonight." She looked at him a long moment. Then she said, "Talk." He talked. He told her, in the low, unhurried voice of a man reading a ledger he had memorized, that her father, Thomas Bennett, had not died of a heart attack in the summer of 2011. He had died of a heart attack, yes. That part was medically accurate. But the heart attack had been the punctuation on a sentence that had been written for him by a man named Cesare Bruno, who had, over the 18 months preceding, systematically bought out Bennett Meridian Freight's creditors, planted a forged manifest in Thomas Bennett's own office, tipped a federal prosecutor tanked the company's stock, and on the morning of the arraignment, taken possession of the Red Hook warehouse and the Chicago dockside offices for approximately 11 cents on the dollar. Thomas Bennett had walked into his lawyer's office on a Tuesday morning to sign the papers. He had never walked out. The coroner had said his heart. Damiano Vitale said the consequences of theft. Cesare Bruno was the head of the Bruno family, which was the Vitale's rival for control of the Great Lakes freight corridor. Cesare Bruno was old money for the underworld and had cleaned his money over 3 generations through certain old Chicago families who had been willing to hold his hand under the tablecloth. The oldest and cleanest of those families was Ashford. The Ashford Winter Ballroom was, in its origins, a laundering operation with a string quartet. Camilla Ashford's father had signed the paperwork that renamed Bennett Meridian Freight to Ashford Bruno Logistics in the spring of 2012. Camilla Ashford had been, at the time, a junior at Latin, sitting 3 rows behind Nora in Ms. Pratt, Ellery's American history class. She knew, Nora said. She said it flatly. It was not a question. She knew what a 15-year-old girl knows about her father's business, which is that there is money in the house that was not in the house last year, and that a friend at school no longer wears new shoes. Damiano's eyes were very steady. "I am not going to tell you she plotted your ruin as a child. I am going to tell you that she has known, since she was 15, what her family did to yours, and she has in that time taken every opportunity to make sure you understood, without her ever having to say it, that she knew, and that you would never be permitted to say so out loud." Nora sat very still. "Why do you know any of this?" she said at last. "Because I had been building a case against Cesare Bruno for 4 years, and your father's file is the cleanest one I have. Why do you know me?" He was quiet. "Miss Bennett," he said, "I have known your name since April. I have not approached you because there was no clean way to approach you that did not look like exactly what it would have been. A man using a woman's grief as a lever." He looked down at his own hands folded on the table between them, and Nora noticed for the first time that they were very carefully clean, and that the knuckles of the right one bore a thin, silvered scar she suspected had a story. "I would not have approached you tonight either. I was in a car on Michigan Avenue on my way to a meeting I did not particularly want to attend. I saw a woman walking east on Oak in a wet dress without a coat, and my driver, who is a better man than I am, said, "Sir," and I looked, and I recognized you. He glanced up. I told him to stop. That is the extent of what I planned tonight, Miss Bennett. Everything else is a conversation you and I are having for the first time. Nora believed him. She did not know why she believed him, and later going back over it, she would decide it was because he had told her without being asked. The least flattering version of the story, that he had known her name and had not come for her. A liar would have come dressed as a rescuer. "The names," he said gently, "if you want to give them to me." She gave him 3. Camilla Ashford. That was 1. Whitney Basher, the bridesmaid, the one who had said the dress was familiar. That was 2. Grace Molina. That was 3. Damiano Vitale's face did not change at the 3rd name. He wrote none of them down. He simply nodded once and said, "Miss Molina was the friend." She was. She held the phone. Yes. She held the phone. Yes. That is the worst of them then. Yes. All right. He signaled barely, one finger lifted from the table, and a man Nora had not noticed sitting 3 booths away stood up and came over. He was lean, watchful, in his early 40s, and he was carrying a small leather notebook. "Enzo," Damiano said, "this is Miss Bennett. She is not to be spoken of outside this room." 3 names, in order: Camilla Ashford, Whitney Bache, Grace Molina. Full workups by morning. Priority on Molina. "I want to know who paid her, and I want to know by breakfast, sir." Also, the dress, the dress, the dress, the dress. She is wearing a wet dress. Have something sent to the townhouse by the time we arrive. Her size. Her taste, not mine. If you do not know her taste, ask her. Enzo turned to Nora. He inclined his head very slightly. Not a bow, but the suggestion of one. "Miss Bennett," he said. "Colors." Nora blinked. "Anything but green." "Anything but green." "Understood." He was gone before she could think of a follow-up. Nora looked back at Damiano Vitale. "I am not going to your townhouse," she said. "No," he agreed. "You are going to your apartment, and you are going to sleep. I'm going to my townhouse. There is a bag being sent to your apartment as well, because you cannot go into whatever you are going into tomorrow in a coat from the outlet mall in Aurora. And I do not want you spending your mother's medicine money on clothes for a war I invited you into. If that offends you, we can argue about it in the car. But it is being sent. How do you know about my mother's?" "April, Miss Bennett." She sat back against the leather. She looked at him. Really looked, for the first time, at the man across the booth. Not the coat or the car or the voice, but the man. He was, she saw, tired. Not sleepy tired, the other kind. The kind that came from carrying a name for a long time. There was grey at his temples that had not been there at 30, she suspected, and there was a stillness in his hands that was not calm, but discipline. He was watching her the way a man watches a door he has been standing outside of for a long time, waiting to be told he can come in. "What do you want?" she said quietly. "From me." "I want to know what you want," he said. "From them." She thought about it. She thought about it for a long time. She thought about the small, delighted intake of breath. She thought about the wine, cold and thin, running down the front of her mother's memorial dress. She thought about a 15-year-old girl in a school library, eating lunch alone. "I want them to lose," she said at last. "Everything they took from us. And then a little bit more, so they know the difference." Damiano Vitale did not smile, but something at the corner of his mouth moved. The ghost of a thing that might have been a smile in a different life, and he inclined his head. "That," he said, "is a very acceptable answer, Miss Bennett." The bag arrived at her apartment in Edgewater at 11 the next morning. It was not a bag. It was 3 garment boxes and a small hard case, and it was carried up the 4 flights of her walk-up by a very polite young man who did not comment on the state of the stairwell. The boxes contained, in order, a black war coat, floor-length cut for her actual body, the sort of coat that made a woman look like a verdict walking down the sidewalk, a suit charcoal, wide-legged trousers, and a jacket that closed with a single button at the sternum, in a fabric that felt like the inside of a promise, and a dress the color of old wine, long-sleeved, high-necked cut on the bias, in a size that had clearly not been guessed. The hard case contained a pair of earrings, jet, simple, heavy, and a note in a hand Nora did not recognize. Miss Bennett, 12:30, the car will be downstairs. Wear the suit. D.V. She wore the suit. The car took her to a glass tower on Wacker Drive she had walked past 1,000 times without ever going into. The lobby had the temperature and the acoustics of a cathedral. A woman at the desk said Miss Bennett, 42nd floor, without asking for her name. The elevator opened onto a floor that was apparently entirely one office, Vitale Holdings in unshowy brass letters on the wall, and Enzo Marchetti was waiting for her at the elevator. And he walked her to a conference room, where Damiano Vitale was standing at the window with his back to the door. "Miss Bennett," he said, without turning. "Thank you for coming. You didn't leave me much of a choice. I left you the entire choice. You came anyway." "That is a different thing." He turned, he looked at the suit. He did not react to it, which Nora appreciated. Not the fake overreaction of a man performing his approval, and not the studied non-reaction of a man withholding it. He simply saw her, and he nodded, and he pulled out the chair at the head of the long table for her, and he sat at her right hand. There was a folder on the table. It was thick. Grace Molina, Damiano said, was paid $4,000 by a woman named Portia Kim, who was Camilla Ashford's assistant on Thursday afternoon. The pretext was social media consulting. The actual instruction, which Miss Kim was foolish enough to put in a text message, was, I quote, "Get her there in something we can work with." Nora closed her eyes. She staffed the event on Thursday knowing this. She recommended you to fill in on Saturday knowing this. She told you no one would notice you knowing this. She held the phone knowing this. She has additionally been selling stories about her co-workers to the Tribune Society desk for 18 months at $300 a story. She is not a friend, Miss Bennett. She has never been one. Nora opened her eyes. She said, "Okay. Okay. 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 What do we do?" Damiano Vitale looked at her for a long moment. Then he opened the folder. They spent 4 hours in that conference room. Enzo Marchetti came in and out. A silver-haired man Damiano, introduced as Salvatore Conti, the family's consigliere, sat quietly at the far end of the table and did not speak for the first 2 hours, and then when he spoke in one clean sentence. "The girl is right, Damiano. Do it her way." Nora did not know in the moment what her way was, because she had not at that point articulated a way, but she understood later that Salvatore Conti had been watching her face while she read the folder, and had seen something in it he approved of. The folder contained in cold-typed pages the map of the Ashford world. It contained Camilla's engagement, a hedge fund heir from Greenwich named Preston Wilder, whose family had, delicately, been asking questions about certain irregularities in the Ashford Charitable Trust. It contained Whitney Barsh's fiancé, a junior partner at a white shoe firm on LaSalle, who had, 6 weeks earlier, been quietly interviewed by 2 federal agents about a matter he had not yet told his fiancée about. It contained Camilla's father, Gerald Ashford, whose second mortgage on the Lake Forest house was the sort of second mortgage that a man in his position was not supposed to have. It contained the bank Camilla Ashford's father used, which was, coincidentally, a bank on whose board Damiano Vitale's cousin sat. It contained, on the last page, a photograph of Camilla Ashford at 18, in a red bikini, on a boat off the coast of Croatia, sitting on the lap of Cesare Bruno's son, Marco. The photograph was dated August 2013. Camilla Ashford had, at the time, been publicly dating the son of a United States senator. She was 17 in this photograph, Nora said quietly, reading the metadata. 17 and 3 months. Marco Bruno was 31. Marco Bruno was 31. Does the senator's son know? The senator's son does not know. Does the senator know? Does the senator know? Damiano Vitale allowed himself at last a very small smile. Not yet, Miss Bennett. They did not, that afternoon, decide to release the photograph. They did not decide to release anything. What Damiano Vitale walked her through, methodically, over 4 hours and 2 pots of coffee, was the architecture of a reckoning. It would begin, he said, with a rumor. Rumors, in the world the Ashfords inhabited, were a currency more valuable than money, because rumors could not be countersued. The rumor would begin at a Tuesday luncheon on Astle Street, planted by a woman named Beatrice Colley, who was Salvatore Conti's cousin's wife and who had for 30 years been the sort of woman other women pretended to like and actually feared. The rumor would concern the state of Gerald Ashford's finances and would be delivered in the tone of poor Marion, "I don't know how they'll get through Christmas." By Wednesday, the rumor would be at 3 luncheons. By Thursday, the rumor would be at the club. By Friday, Preston Wilder's mother would call Preston Wilder from her house in Greenwich and would say, in the tone that Wilder mothers used, "Darling, there's a thing." Nora watched all of this be laid out and understood, dimly, that she was watching a man do something he was very good at, in the way one watches a surgeon or a violinist. She said, when he was done, "And Grace." Damiano set down his pen. "Grace Molina is your call, Miss Bennett. What are the options?" The options range from she is out of a job by Monday to she is out of a city by Friday. There is a middle option, which is that she keeps her job at the Drake, and every person on the events desk in this city receives over the course of the next month a very carefully worded note about a certain incident and a certain video, and Grace Molina spends the rest of her professional life understanding that no one in this town will ever again trust her with a client's name. She will not know who to be angry with. She will not know why the calls have stopped coming. She will, over the course of about 2 years, become a woman other women stop returning texts from. That is the middle option. It is the one I would recommend. Because a woman who sold her friend for $4,000 does not deserve the mercy of a clean firing. She deserves to watch the water go out around her ankles, slowly, and never quite know where the tide went. Nora thought about the small, delighted intake of breath. The middle option, she said. The middle option. She deserved. The middle option. And Camilla. Camilla, Damiano said, is not a middle option, Miss Bennett. Nora nodded. No, she said. I didn't think she was. The rumor went out on Tuesday. By Thursday, it was at the club. By Friday, Preston Wilder's mother had called Preston Wilder from her house in Greenwich, and Preston Wilder had called Camilla Ashford's father from his office on Madison. And Gerald Ashford had at 1:40 in the afternoon Chicago time poured himself a scotch he did not entirely finish. By Saturday, the Tribune Society desk, the same desk to which Grace Molina had been feeding stories, ran a small item on page 6, 3 paragraphs long, headlined, Ashford Winter Ballroom draws more smaller crowd this year. The item was not about the ballroom. The item was about who had not attended, which included 2 federal judges, the mayor's chief of staff, and a hedge fundaire named Preston Wilder. On Sunday, Whitney Bashir's fiancé was named in a sealed indictment that unsealed on Monday morning at 9. On Monday afternoon, Grace Molina was passed over for a promotion she had considered a formality. On Tuesday, Camilla Ashford tried to call Nora Bennett. Nora Bennett did not answer. On Wednesday, Camilla Ashford came to Nora Bennett's apartment. Nora saw her through the peephole. She was in a camel coat, hair loose, no makeup, which was, Nora understood, itself a costume. The costume of I have come to you as a real person. Please, receive me as one. Camilla was holding a small white box tied with a ribbon, the kind of box one brought when one wanted to be seen bringing it. Nora opened the door. Nora? Camilla. Can I come in? No. Yen. Can I come in? No. Camilla blinked. She had not, Nora suspected, been told no in a domestic doorway in her entire life. Nora, please. I came to apologize. Okay. The wine. The wine at the ballroom. It was. I was drunk, Nora. I was so drunk, I don't even remember most of that night, and Whitney told me what happened, and I have been sick about it. I have been sick, Camilla. And I brought you these. They're from Vosges. They're the ones you used to like in high school. Do you remember? Camilla, stop talking. Camilla stopped talking. Nora looked at her for a long time. Camilla Ashford, in the dim fluorescent light of a 4th-floor Edgewater hallway, was smaller than Nora remembered her. She had always been smaller than Nora remembered her, actually. This was one of the tricks Camilla Ashford played on the people around her. The trick of taking up, in memory, more space than she took up in fact. Standing in a doorway she had not been invited into, holding a box of chocolates she had bought at an airport lounge that morning on the way back from her father's emergency meeting with his attorneys in New York. She was, Nora saw, just a woman. A frightened woman, in fact. A woman whose engagement had been quietly called off on Sunday afternoon and who did not yet know that her father had on Tuesday morning been asked to resign from the board of the Literacy Foundation he had chaired for 22 years, and who did know in some animal part of her that she was not letting herself examine, that things were coming apart in a pattern she had never encountered before, and who had come, therefore, to the one person she could think of who might, if she groveled prettily enough, forgive her back into safety. "You've come to ask me to stop," Nora said. "Nora, you don't know what's happening, do you? You just know something is." "I don't. Nora, I don't know what you mean. You've come to ask me to stop because you think I'm behind it. Which is interesting, Camilla, because a week ago you didn't think I was capable of dressing myself, and now you think I'm capable of dismantling your family." Camilla's mouth opened. "I'm going to give you one piece of advice," Nora said evenly, "and I'm giving it to you because we went to Latin together, and because there was a version of my life in which you and I could have been friends, and because I want you to remember, when you look back on this, that I was fair to you in a way you were never fair to me. Are you listening?" Camilla was listening. "Go home," Nora said. "Sit down with your father. Tell him to sell the Lake Forest house before the bank calls the note, because the bank is going to call the note. Tell him to give back the naming rights on the Bennett wing at Mercy in writing, before Christmas. Tell him not to fight the resignation from the foundation board. Tell your mother to stop calling my mother's home number, because if she calls it one more time, I will find a way to make her stop that neither of us will enjoy. And Camilla. Yes, the video Grace took at the ballroom. I would like it deleted from every server it exists on by Friday at noon. Not just from her phone, from every phone she sent it to and every account she uploaded it to. That is a thing that is now your problem, not mine. If it is still online at noon on Friday, other things will happen at 12:01 that you will not be able to stop. Do you understand me?" Camilla was crying now. Silently. She was crying the way women like Camilla Ashford cried, which was carefully, with awareness of the light. "Yes," she whispered. "Good. Nora and Camilla, there is a photograph. From Croatia. In August of 2013. You know the one. I want you to know that it exists. And I want you to know that I have it. And I want you to know that it is not part of the terms I just gave you. It is, instead, the thing I have decided not to do. Because I am a person who was taught, by a father you helped bury, that mercy is a choice you make on purpose. I am making it on purpose. I want you to remember, for the rest of your life, that I chose to make it. Because there will come a day, Camilla, when you are tempted to tell yourself that what happened to your family this year was bad luck, or a bad market, or your father's poor decisions. And I want you to know, on that day, that it was not. It was me. It was me being fair to you. Now take your chocolates and go home." Camilla went home. The video was gone by Friday at 11:47. The Lake Forest house went on the market in January. The Bennett wing at Mercy General had its name restored in a small ceremony that Nora did not attend on the second Tuesday in February. Grace Molina lost the promotion. Grace Molina, over the following 8 months, lost 3 clients, then 5, then the account she had been trying to bring in for a year. Grace Molina began, in the way people begin, to be a name that other people said quietly, with a small headshake. Grace Molina left the Drake in October for a job at a smaller hotel on the near north side, and then in the spring for a job in Milwaukee where she did not, so far as Nora ever heard, land on her feet. Whitney Batch, his fiancée, went to trial in June. The trial went badly for him, and worse for Whitney's family, whose name was, unavoidably, in the papers for 8 consecutive days. Whitney returned the ring. Whitney moved quietly to her aunt's house in Bar Harbor. Whitney was not, to Nora's knowledge, invited to any Ashford Winter Ballroom again. Camilla Ashford married, in 2026, a decent man from Wilmot who worked in commercial real estate and had never heard of the Bruno family. Camilla, by all accounts, made him a good wife. Camilla, by all accounts, did not attend any function on Astor Street for the rest of her life. Camilla, by all accounts, was afraid of the color moss green. Nora Bennett did not, in any of those months, become anyone else's punchline. She also did not, in those months, become Damiano Vitale's anything, publicly. He kept his careful, agonizing distance the way he had kept it in that first booth at Testa, not withholding, exactly, but disciplined. He picked her up on Sunday afternoons and walked with her along the lakefront and did not touch her. He sat across from her at dinner and refilled her wine and did not touch her. He asked on the third Sunday whether she would prefer he stop asking her to Sunday walks. She said no. He nodded and did not touch her and walked her home. On a Tuesday in April, 5 months to the day since the ballroom, the investigation into Cesare Bruno that Damiano had been building for 4 years, unsealed at the federal courthouse in the Loop. It unsealed with 17 counts. It unsealed with Thomas Bennett's name in the second paragraph of the indictment, restored to the public record for the first time since 2011. It unsealed in the last count with a name Damiano had not warned her about because he had not been sure until Sunday, Renzo Fontana, Damiano's own underboss, who had been feeding Cesare Bruno the family shipping routes for 11 months in exchange for a promise that when the dust settled, Renzo would be the man left standing. Damiano read the indictment in his office that Tuesday morning. He set it down. He looked at Enzo Marchetti and said, "How long have you known about Renzo?" 6 days. Why did you wait? Because I wanted to see what he did about Miss Bennett's mother. Damiano's face did not move. What did he do about Miss Bennett's mother? He tried, sir, on Sunday. A pharmacy on Taylor Street. The delivery was intercepted. Miss Bennett does not know. Damiano was quiet for a very long time. Then he stood up and put on his coat and walked out of the office, and according to the driver who took him, did not speak for the entire ride to a certain building on the west side, and did not speak for the 2 hours he was inside it, and did not speak for the ride back. His knuckles, when he came back, were split. Enzo Marchetti carried his coat. He came to Nora's apartment that night. He knocked. She opened. He stood in the doorway with his hands at his sides. "Nora, Damiano, I am going to tell you something, and I do not want you to interrupt me." "Okay. Someone tried to hurt your mother on Sunday. It did not happen. She is fine. The oxygen concentrator that arrived at her house on Monday morning is a hospital-grade unit that will outlast you. The pharmacist in question no longer works in this state. I did not ask you before I did that. I did not ask you because I did not want you to have to know about it. That was, I think now, the wrong decision. And I am telling you now because I do not want a second wrong decision on top of the first one. Do you understand me?" "Yes." "Are you angry?" Nora thought about it. "No," she said. "Not at you." "Okay." "Damiano." "Yes." "Come inside." He came inside. He stood in her small living room in his black overcoat and looked at her small couch and her small bookshelves and her mother's oxygen concentrator humming quietly in the corner. And Nora understood watching him, that he did not know what to do in a room this size, that he had spent his entire adult life in rooms in which the correct behavior had been decided by someone in a suit 3 generations ago, that he did not, in a 4th-floor Edgewater walk-up, know where to put his hands. She took his coat. She hung it on the hook by the door. She said, "Sit down." He sat down. He sat down. She sat next to him. Not across, not for the first time, and she took his right hand in both of hers and looked, very carefully, at the split knuckles. They had been cleaned. They had been bandaged. They had been bandaged by someone who cared whether they scarred, which meant they had been bandaged by him alone, in a bathroom at 3 in the morning, because he had not wanted to ask Enzo to do it. She lifted his hand and pressed her mouth, once, to the back of it, over the bandage. He made a sound she had not heard him make, a small, involuntary sound, the sound of a man who has been standing outside a door for a very long time and has, at last, been told he can come in. "Nora," he said. "Damiano, I am not. I do not know how to do this. I know. I have not. I know." She took his face in both of her hands. He let her. She turned it toward her. His eyes up close were not gunmetal. They were in fact a very dark grey, the color of the lake on a Tuesday in December, and they were in that moment very frightened. And Nora Bennett, who had been the plus-size girl the ballroom had laughed at, Nora Bennett, who had been the joke on Grace Molina's phone, Nora Bennett, who had walked out into the wind off Lake Michigan in a wet dress without a coat, looked into the frightened eyes of the most feared man in Chicago and understood at last what she had been given. She kissed him. She kissed him slowly. She kissed him the way one kisses a man who has been waiting 11 months to be kissed and who does not, entirely, believe he has been. She kissed him until his hands, at last, came up to her waist, careful, as though he were afraid she would break, and then, when she did not break, less careful, and then not careful at all. He said her name, once, against her mouth. She said, "I know." She said, "I know, Damiano." She said, "You are allowed." Cesare Bruno was arraigned in June. He pled not guilty on all 17 counts. His trial began in September. He was convicted on 14 of them in November. He was sentenced, in January of the following year, to a term that would outlast him. He died, in the way old men die in federal facilities, in a bed. The confession Nora had made him sign, notarized by Salvatore Conti at a warehouse in Red Hook on a night the Chicago River had frozen at the edges, was released per its terms to the U.S. Attorney's Office the morning of his death. His grandchildren read about their grandfather in the Tribune the same day they read about his passing. Renzo Fontana was never seen in Chicago again. Salvatore Conti, who had watched Renzo grow up in the family, sat with Damiano for one long night after it was done, and said, at dawn, "You did what your father could not have done, Damiano, because you had a reason he did not have." He looked at Nora across the room, where she was making coffee she did not intend to drink. Keep the reason. Damiano kept the reason. They married in the spring at a small church on Chicago Avenue that had been standing since before either family existed. Nora wore a dress the color of cream and iron. Margaret Bennett walked her daughter down the aisle on an oxygen line, so light it might have been a ribbon. Enzo Marchetti and a broad, quiet soldier named Vince Ricci stood beside Damiano in matching dark suits. Grace Molina was not invited. Camilla Ashford was not invited. Whitney Bosch was not invited. The pews were instead full of people Nora had not known she had. The widow of a dockworker, Thomas Bennett, had once loaned $3,000 to in 1998, and the dockworker's grown children, and the woman who had run the front office at Bennett Meridian Freight for 22 years, and the priest who had buried Thomas Bennett, and who had all these years kept a small framed photograph of him on his own desk. Salvatore Conti gave the toast. He was old, and his voice shook a little, but he stood without help. "To the Vitali family," he said, "and to the woman who taught us what we had forgotten. That mercy is a thing you extend on purpose, and that when it is not extended, there's a reason." He looked at Nora. "Cross this house, and you will learn her reason. Do not cross this house." Nora Bennett lifted her glass. She did not say anything at all. She did not need to. The room understood her. Outside the church, on Chicago Avenue, in the soft spring light, a young woman on the sidewalk paused with her phone lifted, taking a picture of the wedding party as it came out. Enzo Marchetti stepped forward, politely, to ask her to put the phone away. The young woman apologized. She said she was a tourist from Ohio and had thought it looked like a movie. Nora, on Damiano's arm, watched the small exchange and thought, briefly, without weight, of Grace Molina in a hallway at the Drake with a phone at hip height, and of the small, delighted intake of breath. She let it pass through her. She kept walking. They thought she was a joke on a ballroom floor. They thought she was a punchline in a wet green dress, a wine stain to laugh at over brunch, a story to tell at the next party. They forgot that some women, when you finally look at them, look back, and that there is no joke in any room on any floor in any city on earth more expensive than a woman you underestimated the wrong Saturday night. If you love a heroine who does not shrink, do me a favor, hit that like button, share this with someone who needs to remember her own weight in the world, and subscribe for the next one. And in the comments tell me, who was the Camilla in your life? And what did the day look like when you finally stopped being afraid of her?